Is this the greatest stalker anthem of all time? I mean, we've covered some sinister songs on the show in the past, but this upbeat sing-along ditty, it takes on a terrifying edge when you realize it was inspired by real events from the life of today's featured artist. All it takes is one nut job to turn your world upside down. And this guy in this song, he was certifiable. He harassed this legend at work. He called her all hours of the night. He even broke into her apartment at one time and held a gun against her cheek. This violent psychopath had her fearing for her life. Years later, she looked back on these crazy events and she wrote one of the most simultaneously catchy and disturbing tracks of the rock era. Today's breakdown might have you thinking twice about singing this one out loud. Very catchy. Besides that, this legend also got into the car of a serial killer at one time. Crazy. The story's coming up next on Professor of Rock. Hey, music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. You know, if you remember hiding certain cassettes or records from your parents for a risque or controversial picture on the cover, you're going to want to subscribe to this channel of potent musical nostalgia. Make sure to do that below by clicking on the big red button. Click the bell so you always know when our latest come out. We have some great interviews coming up. Also, make sure to check us out on Patreon. We feature exclusive content. You can become an honorary producer within our video descriptions as well. And we also have our merch below. So it's time for another edition of Number One in Our Hearts. This is a show that honors songs that were so undeniably great. They should have been number one on the Billboard Hot 100 chart. For whatever reason, though, they came up short. Sometimes it's radio play, sometimes it's lack of marketing, label support. Whatever it was. Today, we're returning to a band that we've covered a couple times on this channel, one of my favorites. It's a band who actually had 4 number one hits, and even though today's track wasn't one of them, it should have been. Talking about the classic song, One Way or Another, by Blondie. It's from their massive 1978 album, Parallel Lines.
One way or another, I'm gonna find you.
Masters of high-energy, guitar-driven pop, Blondie emerged out of New York's East Village punk scene to become one of New Wave's most influential bands ever. Although it would take a few albums for Americans to sit up and take notice. Fronted by the iconic vocalist Debbie Harry, Blondie released 4 studio albums in the 70s, beginning with their self-titled debut in December of '76. Although a no-show on the US charts, the album was a hit in Australia where it peaked at number 14. The record's second single, In the Flesh, also climbed to number 2 down under.
Can't wait to touch you in the flesh.
Their next offering was Plastic Letters. That was released in February of '78. This time the album did break into the Billboard 200, but it topped out at a lackluster number 72. And there were no traces of single success on the Hot 100 from that one. Still, 2 tracks did breach the top 10 in the UK, Dennis, and I'm Always Touched by Your Presence, Dear.
I'm so in love with you. Now I'm always touched by your presence, dear.
So 2 albums in, Blondie was having some overseas hits, but success in the US had eluded them. American radio had tight control over their playlists and were slow to play any new genres at this point, which meant that Blondie, with their connections to punk, wasn't doing them any favors. Now, that being said, commercial success in the States would not elude them for much longer. In fact, the release of their 3rd album, Parallel Lines, everything changed. So fast forward to the summer of 1978 and the making of Parallel Lines. And this time, Blondie's lineup was comprised of lead singer Debbie Harry, guitarist Chris Stein, and Frankie Infante. There was bassist Nigel Harrison, drummer Clem Burke, and keyboardist Jimmy Destry. Having dropped their previous producer, Richard Godeher, the band teamed up with pop master Mike Chapman. He'd worked previously with Sweet and Suzi Quatro, to name a few. It was a great choice, actually. Chapman would imbue the project with enough commercial gloss to turn the band into a worldwide sensation. Now, the recording process began in June of '78. It was at the record plant in New York. Despite being given 6 months to complete the album by their label, Blondie finished in just 6 weeks. However, that didn't mean that recording it was easy. Let's just say the band had some rough edges coming into this project. Actually, Mike Chapman didn't hold back his assessment of their talent. He described them as musically the worst band that he'd ever worked with. He further elaborated when he said, the Blondies were tough in the studio, real tough. None of them liked each other, except Chris and Debbie, and there was so much animosity. They were really, really juvenile in their approach to life, and they didn't give about anything. They just wanted to have fun, and they didn't want to work too hard getting it. End of quote. In terms of musical mastery, Mike didn't see much of it. So during those 6 weeks, he took the band to school. He forced them to redo their parts over and over and over again until they got it just right. But despite their inexperience, Mike Chapman saw big potential in this band, particularly with Debbie and Chris, the latter whom he called a wonderful, wonderful songwriter. Regarding Debbie, Mike said she was a great singer and a great vocal stylist with a beautifully identifiable voice. However, she was also extremely moody and very emotional. Many have said that Deborah Harry shed a lot of tears making this record, and she often disappeared into the bathroom for hours at a time. It was a habit that was exacerbated by Mike being really hardcore when it came to her vocal takes. Said Debbie about it, Mike had a different approach than Richard Goderer. He was more concerned with making our music so that it could be played on the radio. He was the hitmeister. His focus was a more refined version of what we were because we were kind of rough-edged. Musically, Blondie may have seemed like a lost cause when they entered the studio. But thanks to Mike Chapman, when they were finished, they had smoothed out a lot of those rough edges. Now it was time to break into the American charts in a big way, and that they did. Parallel Lines, it launched Blondie into the stratosphere. Rose to number 6 on the Billboard 200, number 2 in Canada, and number 1 in the UK. The album, it issued 6 singles, including their stateside breakthrough Heart of Glass. That one reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and the Cashbox chart. Parallel Lines also featured international hits. Picture This.
All I want is a picture of you.
I'm Gonna Love You Too.
You're gonna say you love me, 'cause I'm gonna love you too.
Hanging on the Telephone.
Hanging on the telephone.
And Sunday Girl.
Living dreams Sunday girl.
And as for today's feature, One Way or Another, that became Blondie's second successful U.S. single and a Canadian top 10 hit. Written by Debbie Harry and Nigel Harrison, One Way or Another was, according to Harrison, originally a psychedelic ventures-like futuristic surf song gone wrong. I love that.
I'm gonna get you one way or another. I'm gonna.
But keyboardist Jimmy Destry really liked the music, and so the band played it a lot while they were on the road, apparently. After a while, Debbie picked up on it and came up with the Getcha Getcha Getchas, one of the catchiest parts of the song.
Yeah, I'm gonna get you one way or another.
Harry said that the title and the idea for the song just popped into her head one day during a rehearsal, and then most of it was hashed out on the spot right then and there. Now, as for the ending, where the song goes really crazy, that was Chapman's brilliant idea. The track's lyrics are pretty dark, and they really go into detail about a guy with evil intentions. I will drive past your house, and if the lights are all down, I'll see who's around.
And if the lights are all down.
But since the music, it's so light and catchy, you don't really notice it first. Expanding on that, Debbie explained that the track was inspired by repeated encounters with an ex-boyfriend turned stalker. Deborah Harry would say about it, and I quote, "I was actually stalked by a nut job, so it came out of a not-so-friendly personal event. I tried to inject a little levity into it to make it more, lighthearted. It was a survival mechanism." End of quote. Okay, but what she's talking about here is actually some pretty crazy stuff. In her autobiography, Face It, she details the whole thing. Here's the story. So back in 1972, while she was living in New Jersey, Debbie started seeing this guy who she referred to as Mr. C. The two met at a health club where she was working. Now, Debbie was looking for a new place to live, and Mr. C offered to help her get an apartment close to where she worked. Debbie took him up on the offer, and the two started seeing each other, but things got really weird quick. Now, as we get into this crazy story, you're not going to believe this. I want to thank today's sponsor, NordVPN. Recently, one of my social sites got hacked, and it's been a nightmare trying to fix it. I've since found a virtual private network that will protect me against internet criminals in the future. It is NordVPN. All I had to do was download the NordVPN app on my phone and computer, and with a single click, I am so much safer to manage all my online content and to watch my favorite content so I don't have to worry about spies and data theft. It dawned on me that POR, it's an online channel, and I should encourage the POR community to check out NordVPN so that you can be fully protected while you watch the videos, POR at home or when you're traveling or wherever, because you're vulnerable just surfing the web at a cafe or an airport because you could easily connect to what you think is a legitimate free Wi-Fi network only to find out way too late that it's a fake network. That's hacked into your sensitive data like passwords and financial info and such. You gotta protect yourself. Click on the unique link in the description or right up here on our info button to get NordVPN, the fastest VPN on the planet. If you purchase a 2-year plan, you'll get 4 extra months. Okay, so this was back in the time when Debbie was still trying to break into the music business and she'd drive to New York to catch live shows and make connections in the industry. However, this really pissed off Mr. C. He didn't like to let Debbie out of his sight. That's a red flag right there, of course. But it wasn't until she went to visit her grandmother one Sunday that it all came to a head. Believing she was lying about where she was going, Mr. C followed her and barged into the house looking for another man. Realizing he just made a jackass of himself, he excused himself and left from there. But you know what? That was it for Debbie. And she broke up with Mr. C shortly after that. Except for the fact that Mr. C wouldn't take no for an answer. He called her incessantly after that, during all hours of the day and the night. He started stalking her at the hair salon where she now worked. He started threatening her, and he started following her home, whenever she got off work. Now, around this time, Debbie Harry joined the band The Stilettos, which also included guitarist Chris Stein. He became Debbie's boyfriend. But a boyfriend, that wasn't enough to deter Mr. C. He continued to bombard her with calls and spew threats. One night, Debbie came home and found her window had been tampered with. Slider rods and latches were actually broken. Realizing there had been a break-in, she fixed the locks the best she could and went to her bedroom to watch TV, just to settle her nerves. Later that night, though, Mr. C came crashing through her bedroom window wielding a handgun. It happened so fast she didn't have time to call 911 or for help. His face was bright red and he had this maniacal smile on his face. Pointing the revolver at her, he screamed, "Where is he, Debbie? Where is he?" Mr. C tore through the other rooms, searching for this other man. Returning to the bedroom, he slapped her and he sat down on the bed for an hour. Crouched up, menacing. And for one horrifying moment, he even stuck the pistol against her cheek and started to get really rough with her. This was a nightmare come to life. Thankfully, the nut job finally left, promising to fix her window. Now, as soon as he did, Debbie hightailed it out of her apartment and she got the hell out of Jersey. She actually relocated to New York. But Mr. C kept harassing her at the New Jersey salon where she worked. Debbie, like any rational person, went to the police with her concerns, but actually proved to be of little help. The situation finally came to an end one night when Debbie was at Chris's apartment. While she was there, Mr. C called looking for her, and Chris answered the phone, and in Debbie's words, he talked tough. She doesn't remember exactly what he said. Whatever it was, though, it must have scared the hell out of Mr. C, because after that, he left her alone. Just an absolutely insane story. I guess the only silver lining is that the rest of us got an iconic song out of it.
Yeah, I'm gonna get you one way or another.
But hearing what Deborah Harry went through to write this, it almost makes you feel kind of guilty listening to it. One way or another, it perfectly captured the fear and the angst and the anger that Debbie felt about being stalked, if you listen to the words.
And yeah, the lights are all out.
Amazingly, she turned all those negative emotions on their head, though. And she turned a terrifying experience into a cathartic and empowering anthem.
I'll follow your course down.
So like I mentioned earlier, One Way or Another was Blondie's second American hit single. It actually reached number 24 on the Billboard Hot 100. North of the border, it did even better, climbing to number 7 in Canada. And on Blondie's hit list, One Way or Another comes in as their 5th highest charting song in the States. The other 4 ahead of it were all number 1 hits: Heart of Glass, Call Me, The Tide is High, and Rapture. All of them went to number one.
Seem like the real thing, long too far. Please call me anytime. Call me. The tide is high, but I'm holding on.
Since those days, One Way or Another hasn't done really half bad either, proving itself to be an essential Blondie track. It's had over 400 million streams. It also has a really long list of pop culture media placements. There's the A-Team, Beverly Hills Ninja, Donnie Brasco.
Excuse me, I have to be going. Thank you.
Coyote Ugly, Mean Girls, The Simpsons,
I'm gonna find you. I'm gonna get you one way.
Dawson's Creek, Gilmore Girls, ER, Glee,
I'm gonna win ya. I'll get you. I'll get you.
Spy Next Door, Veronica Mars, Lip Sync Battle, The Goldbergs, Ready Player One, Superstore, 911, Cruella,
I'm gonna win ya. I'm gonna get you one way.
Quantum Leap, Psych, Supernatural, and actually The Muppets with Debbie Harry guest starring.
I'm gonna find ya. I'm gonna get you one way.
One Way or Another has also been covered by Green Day's Billy Joe Armstrong, Georgia Moroder, and One Direction. Also, Mandy Moore did it. Okay, so all this stalker talk got me thinking, what other songs do we have in our playlists that aren't as innocent as we might think they are? A while back, we covered Every Breath You Take by the Police. That's about as notorious a stalker song as you can get. Although, like I said, I've seen people dance to this one at their wedding or even walk down the aisle. Kind of creepy. But doing a little digging, I came up with a disturbingly long list of tracks that fall under the stalker banner. These range from Unhealthy Fixation to Paranoia to Relentless Pursuit to Deranged Voyeurism to Sinister Obsession. And from upbeat offenders to hot and bothered heavy hitters, there's plenty more where that came from. This musical theme, it's surprisingly prolific. Two more songs with obsessive stalker stories that come to mind are Sarah McLachlan's Possession and Radiohead's Creep. The rock era, it's definitely given us some truly irresistible songs that maybe we might want to think twice about singing out loud. But tell us below, what other songs do you think belong on this ill-fated list? Sound innocent, sound catchy, but they're pretty sinister. Where does One Way or Another rank among the all-time stalker greats? Let's have a great discussion below. And speaking of ranking One Way or Another, let's take a moment to put this song right where it belongs at number one in our hearts. The week it topped out at number 24 on the Billboard Hot 100. That was August 24th of 1979. That week, the top 5 songs were number 5, Gold by Jon Stewart, featuring Stevie Nicks. Number 4, The Main Event / Fight by Barbra Streisand. And number 3, Ring My Bell by Anita Ward. And number 2, Good Times by Chic. And at number 1, Bad Girls by Donna Summer, which claimed the top spot for 4 weeks. I think we could make this work and give One Way or Another one of those weeks that Bad Girls had at number 1. Hey, the story behind it should be enough by itself to make it a number 1 track. I mean, for all that Deborah Harry went through, for its massive place in pop culture since then, I gotta say this one definitely deserves the number 1 spot. One last thing, not to add insult to injury, But Debbie Harry was quite nearly a victim of one of the world's most notorious and vicious serial killers, Ted Bundy. She mentioned in her autobiography that I said before. Harry said she encountered Ted Bundy in the 1970s before she was part of Blondie. She explained that she was alone in the streets of Manhattan in the early morning hours, just searching for a taxi. Then a white car pulled up and the driver offered her a ride. Now, Harry had a really bad feeling about getting inside the car, but her feet were aching and the driver seemed to be pretty polite. Upon realizing that she was trapped, Harry managed to escape, and of course, she lived to tell us the story. Apparently, she saw Ted Bundy's actual photo in a magazine article after his arrest. Right then and there, the hairs on the back of her neck stood straight up as she recognized him from that near-death experience in the car ride back in the day. She said, and I quote, "I had not thought about that night for maybe 15 years. It was him." She even said that the inside of the door had no handle, which is something the police confirmed about Bundy and the vehicles he used when picking up victims at the time. It's just insane. Thank heavens Deborah Harry escaped the clutches of one of the world's worst serial killers. Thanks so much for watching. Leave us a comment about Blondie in one way or another. What are your memories of this song? What do you think about its meaning? You listen to those lyrics, it's just crazy. What do you think about some of these stories? What a survivor, man. If you like our content, we invite you to subscribe below. We'd love to have you as part of our content. Till next time, 3 chords and the truth.